Welcome to the Hall of Fame. Nobody wants a plaque in. Tonight, grown adults who stared down poison, rockets, reactors, and one very patient tank of molasses, and confidently chose wrong. These aren't villains, they're volunteers. So buckle up, keep your hands inside the ride, and try to feel just a little bit smarter by the end. Trust me, that bar is low. Number 1. Our first genius is Robert Odlum, a swimming instructor from Washington with a burning need to be right. His theory? That falling through the air doesn't kill you. In Robert's mind, people who died jumping from burning buildings weren't killed by the fall, they just panicked or landed sloppy. So if he could prove a human could survive the plunge, everyone would happily leap into rescue nets and nobody would ever burn again. Genuinely sweet motivation. Terrible execution. Because here's the thing about testing whether falling kills you. The responsible scientist uses a dummy, a sandbag, a watermelon, any object at all that is not the scientist. Robert looked at all those safe options and picked the one test subject he cared about most, himself. And for a stage, he chose the brand new Brooklyn Bridge, a cozy 135 feet above the East River. On May 19, 1885, he stripped down to his swimsuit, climbed up in front of a cheering crowd, packed onto boats, and jumped. And I need you to appreciate this. He was right. The air did not kill him. He fell 135 feet through it in perfect health. The flaw in the plan was never the air. It was the thing waiting at the bottom, the water. A gust spun him mid-flight. So instead of a clean dive, he slapped the river feet and hip first at around 60 miles an hour. Water, at that speed, stops being a liquid and starts being pavement with commitment issues. It ruptured him internally, and he was gone within the hour. The crowd that had gathered to cheer a triumph instead got to watch a man be fished out of the East River, having successfully disproven absolutely nothing except his own life expectancy. So Robert Odlum won his argument and died of being correct on the very same afternoon. The scientific dream and the scientific nightmare in one tidy package. Robert, my man, the entire point of a control group is that you are not supposed to be in it. Number 2. Contestant number 2 is Bando Mitsugoro VIII, and this man was not some random daredevil. He was a legend, a superstar kabuki actor so revered that in 1973, the Japanese government officially declared him a living national treasure. A national treasure. The kind of title that should come with a full-time staff whose only job is to stop you from doing what he did next. In January 1975, Bando sat down at a restaurant in Kyoto and ordered fugu, pufferfish, which is already the culinary equivalent of playing catch with a loaded gun. Fugu contains tetrodotoxin, a poison well over 1,000 times deadlier than cyanide, with no antidote, that slowly paralyzes you while you stay wide awake to enjoy the entire performance. Chefs train for years just to serve the safe parts. And the single deadliest part, the part packed with the most poison, the part so lethal it was banned from sale, is the liver. So naturally, our national treasure ordered the liver. Not one serving. 4 helpings of the most poisonous organ in one of the most poisonous animals on the planet. When the chef hesitated, because of course he did, Bando reassured everyone that he was personally immune to the toxin. His evidence? Vibes. He'd eaten it before and felt fine. Therefore, he was basically poison-proof, a legal argument that would get laughed out of any court and every biology class. The chef, tragically, caved. Bando finished his 4 livers, went back to his hotel, and started to feel a little numb. Then, a lot numb. Over the next several hours, the paralysis climbed up his body until it reached the muscles you kind of need for breathing. And about 8 hours later, the living national treasure was neither living nor treasuring. His death was so high profile, it tightened fugu laws across the whole country and got the liver banned outright. Meaning Bando's final performance saved countless future diners by demonstrating, in the most dramatic way imaginable, exactly why the menu says no. Number 3 is Horace Wells. And this one stings, because the man was genuinely brilliant. Wells was a Connecticut dentist who, in 1844, basically invented the idea of anesthesia. He watched a guy on laughing gas smash his leg at a show and feel absolutely nothing. And Wells had a lightning bolt realization. What if we could switch off pain during surgery? For the era, this was a gift to all of humanity. One of the most important medical ideas anyone would ever have. The problem is how Horace chose to do his research. His lab equipment was Horace. His test subject was Horace. His quality control department was, once again, Horace. Instead of careful trials on volunteers, he started inhaling his own experimental chemicals to see what they did. Nitrous oxide, then ether, then chloroform, one after another, on himself, over and over. And chloroform is not a substance you want to get casual with. Night after night, he dosed himself in the name of science, and slowly, the science stopped being the point. The endless self-experimentation curdled into a chloroform addiction that ate away at his judgment and his mind, until the pioneer who wanted to end all human suffering could no longer manage his own. By January 1848, at just 33 years old, the man who gave the world painless surgery had been consumed by the very chemicals he discovered, and his story ended in genuine tragedy. There's not much to laugh at in the finish, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise or reach for a cheap joke. But there is a lesson bolted to the front of it, and it's a big one. The sentence, "I'll just test the mystery chemical on myself," repeatedly, alone has never once been the opening line of a happy story. Wells proved that anesthesia works and changed medicine forever. He just, tragically, should have let literally anyone else hold the bottle. Number 4 comes with an asterisk, because it's more legend than headline, but it's too perfect to leave out, so consider it our historical warm-up act. Meet Wan Hu, a Ming Dynasty official from around the year 1500, who, the story goes, became the first man in history to attempt space travel using nothing but ambition and gunpowder. Wan Hu looked up at the stars and decided he wanted a closer look. Now, a normal person has that thought, sighs wistfully, and goes back to his paperwork. Wan Hu instead commissioned the world's first and worst spacecraft, a sturdy wooden chair, 2 big kites bolted to the sides for that aerodynamic flair, and 47 of the largest gunpowder rockets money could buy, strapped directly to the seat. 47. Not 2 or 3 to test the concept like a sane man. 47, all at once, on a chair, with a person still in it. He then recruited 47 assistants, handed each of them a torch, sat down in his rocket throne like an emperor of physics, and gave the order to light every single fuse at the exact same time. And look, you already know how this ends, because you understand fire and gunpowder and chairs. There was a colossal roar, an enormous cloud of smoke. And when it finally cleared, there was no chair, no rockets, and, crucially, no Wan Hu. He had achieved liftoff in the same sense that a firework achieves liftoff. Violently, briefly, and exactly once. Historians are fairly sure the whole tale was invented and polished up during the 20th century rocket craze, so please don't quote it on an exam. But here's the punchline that is absolutely real. There is a crater on the far side of the moon officially named Wan Hu in his honor. The man may never have existed, but he is still the only contestant on this entire list who technically made it to the moon, and he did it by inventing the ejector seat about 4 centuries ahead of schedule. Number 5. Now we graduate from individual idiots to institutional ones, because number 5 cost $45 million and took an entire team to pull off. In November 2017, Russia's shiny new Vostochny Cosmodrome launched a rocket carrying a weather satellite called Meteor M, plus 18 smaller satellites hitching a ride from paying customers around the world. Big day. National pride. Cameras rolling. The rocket lifted off flawlessly. Everything looked perfect. And then the satellite simply never showed up in orbit. It didn't blow up. There was no dramatic fireball. It just quietly flew off in the wrong direction and face-planted into the ocean, taking 18 other people's satellites down with it like a designated driver who'd secretly had a few. So what went wrong? Did a sensor fail? A fuel line rupture? Some exotic space gremlin? No. Somebody typed in the wrong address. The rocket's guidance system was programmed with launch coordinates, the numbers that tell it which way is up and where on Earth it's starting from. And the geniuses had loaded the coordinates for Baikonur, Russia's other cosmodrome, the one located in a completely different country hundreds of miles away. So the rocket booted up, checked its notes, confidently decided it had launched from Baikonur, and calculated its entire flight path based on being somewhere it absolutely was not. It flew a perfect textbook trajectory for the wrong starting point and dutifully steered its priceless cargo straight into the sea. This is a $45 million machine built by actual rocket scientists, undone by the cosmic version of setting your GPS to the wrong city and then acting betrayed when you end up in a lake. Somewhere, an intern who got blamed for this is still lying awake at night. And the lesson is eternal, and it applies to spacecraft and email alike. Always, always double-check that the from field is not, in fact, a different country. Number 6 is an instant classic, and it comes to us from Russia, 2017, a country that, based on this list, apparently runs on pure confidence and spare artillery. Our hero is a welder who came across a decommissioned howitzer. For anyone rusty on their military hardware, a howitzer is a very large cannon, the kind designed to hurl explosive shells clear across a battlefield. This one was retired, harmless, just sitting there minding its own business. And our welder, gazing thoughtfully into its long, empty barrel, had the kind of idea that only ever visits a man who has never once in his life been told no. He noticed that a fire extinguisher fit into the barrel absolutely perfectly, snug, like it was destiny. Now, a reasonable person notes this fun little coincidence and moves on with their day. Our welder instead saw a golden opportunity to combine his two great passions, things that fit into other things, and setting things on fire. So he loaded the fire extinguisher into the cannon like a cannonball, and then, because one catastrophic idea is never quite enough, he decided it needed propellant. He poured in calcium carbide and water, which react to produce acetylene, a highly flammable gas that welders know very well. He had, in effect, rebuilt a fully functioning cannon out of scrap and basic chemistry. Then he lit it. And the cannon, being a cannon, did the one and only thing cannons are famous for. It fired. The fire extinguisher launched out of the barrel exactly as designed, a genuine engineering triumph, if you're willing to ignore absolutely everything else. The everything else being that our welder had positioned his own head directly in the barrel's line of fire, apparently to get a better view of his masterpiece. The homemade cannonball then did precisely what cannonballs do to whatever happens to be standing in front of them. He proved his cannon worked. He was just standing on the wrong end of the proof. Rule of thumb, forever. If your weekend project is a working cannon, do not volunteer as the target range. Number 7 comes with a warning label. I could not confirm this one in the historical record, so treat it as a campfire story with a moral rather than a police report. As the tale goes, there was a shopkeeper, call him Jaccario, who was absolutely fed up. His shop kept getting robbed. Break-in after break-in, and he had finally had enough of it. Now, most people in that situation install an alarm. Maybe a camera. Maybe a large dog with strong opinions. Jaccario, according to legend, looked at all those sensible options, found them boring, and decided the only truly proportionate response to shoplifting was to rig his own store with a bomb. A real one. His logic was flawless in the special way that only genuinely terrible logic can be. The next burglar who broke in would trigger the trap and finally get what was coming to him. Justice, delivered by explosive. And you know what? As a burglar deterrent, technically effective. There's just one tiny flaw in the whole booby-trap your own workplace business plan, and it's the exact same flaw shared by every genius who has ever tried it. You also work there. Every single morning. As the story goes, Jaccario armed his deadly surprise, went home glowing with pride, slept the deep sleep of the tactically brilliant, and then walked into his own shop the next morning on total autopilot, coffee in hand, having completely forgotten he'd turned his livelihood into a landmine overnight. The trap did not know the difference between a thief and its own inventor. It only knew the door had opened. Whether or not this exact man ever existed, the pattern absolutely does. History is genuinely full of people who rigged their homes and shops against intruders and became the one and only casualty. The moral stands regardless of the source. A trap that can't tell friend from foe has exactly one guaranteed victim, and it is usually the one holding the morning coffee. Number 8 is a reminder that expensive toys and the urge to show off are a combination older than aviation itself. Picture a man who has just bought himself a brand new amphibious sport plane, a sleek little aircraft that can take off and land right on the water, the kind of purchase that quietly whispers, "You have made it," and everyone within a mile should know. And when you've got a beautiful new machine like that, there is a right way to enjoy it and a wrong way. The right way involves altitude, patience, and a healthy respect for the fact that the ocean has been undefeated for several billion years. The wrong way. The way that lands you on a list like this one involves treating the surface of the water like your own personal racetrack. Because there is a very specific temptation that comes with a plane that can fly low. The pure thrill of skimming right down over the waves, close enough to feel like you're part of the sea, pulling steep climbs and swooping dives just to feel your stomach drop. It looks absolutely spectacular. It feels invincible. And it works beautifully, right up until the exact half second that it doesn't. Because when you're hot dogging just a few feet above open water at high speed, your margin for error isn't measured in seconds. It's measured in inches. One dip a little too low, one aggressive maneuver that bleeds off just a touch too much height, and the water instantly stops being a scenic backdrop and becomes a very hard, very unforgiving wall. At those speeds, the sea has all the gentle give of a concrete parking lot. The plane clipped the surface, and physics collected the bill immediately, the way it always does when a thrill seeker mistakes a good day for a lifetime guarantee. It's the oldest story in all of flying, and it never once stops being true. The sky is patient, the water is patient, and the very moment you decide the rules are for other, lesser pilots is the moment they quietly begin applying to you. Fly high. Save the daring low passes for the flight simulator, where the only thing you crash is your ego. Number 9 takes us out to the desert of Idaho in 1955 and to a very special kind of mistake. The accidental melting of a nuclear reactor by the very people specifically hired not to do that. The reactor was called EBR-1, a pioneering experimental machine, one of the first ever designed to generate real electricity from atomic fission. Cutting-edge science, staffed by serious professionals, running a delicate test on how the reactor behaved under certain conditions. Here's the thing about a nuclear reactor. It is basically a controlled runaway. You are deliberately keeping a nuclear chain reaction on a leash, and that leash is a set of control rods. Pull them out. The reaction speeds up and heats up. Push them in. It calms right down. And for emergencies, you get special fast-acting rods designed to slam in and shut the entire thing down in an instant. The big red panic button of the atomic age. So during the test, the reactor started heating up faster than expected. This is the precise moment the emergency shutdown exists for. The operator reached over to scram it and reached for the wrong control. Instead of triggering the fast emergency rods, he activated the slow-moving ones, the leisurely set that eases in at a relaxed, unhurried, taking its sweet time pace. And a runaway reactor does not politely wait around for the slow rods to stroll over and sort things out. In the couple of seconds it took to realize the mistake and hit the correct button, the core had already blown past 1100 degrees Celsius, and roughly half of the uranium fuel had melted into slag. Half the core. Gone. Because of the nuclear equivalent of grabbing the wrong remote and cranking up the volume during a house fire. The good news is that nobody was killed, and the accident taught engineers priceless lessons about reactor safety. The bad news is that those lessons cost one entire reactor core and, I have to imagine, one operator's lifelong willingness to ever touch a switch again. Nuclear moral of the day: when your two options are fast panic button and slow panic button, maybe label them clearly. Number 10 is where the theme turns genuinely serious, because this time, the confident mistake was not paid for by the person who made it. In July 1981, the brand new Hyatt Regency Hotel in Kansas City was the pride of the city, a gleaming atrium with elegant walkways suspended over the lobby, one hanging directly above another, held up by long steel rods. On this particular evening, the lobby was packed with people at a tea dance, and many of them were standing up on those walkways to watch the crowd below. The disaster was born on a blueprint. The original design called for a single set of rods running from the ceiling all the way down, supporting both walkways together. But that design was awkward to actually build, so the steel supplier proposed a small change. Instead of one long, continuous rod, use two shorter rods, with the upper walkway now carrying the lower one hanging off of it. On paper, it looks like a minor, harmless tweak. In reality, it quietly doubled the load on the upper walkway's connections, asking them to hold up not just their own walkway, but the full weight of the one below it. plus every single person standing on it. The change was submitted, and the engineer signed off on it, apparently without redoing the calculation that would have screamed the joints were now carrying twice what they could possibly bear. That night, under the weight of the crowd, the overloaded connections let go, and both walkways came down onto the lobby below. 114 people were killed. It remains one of the deadliest structural failures in American history. And out of it came sweeping reforms in how engineers review and take personal responsibility for design changes. Reforms that have quietly saved countless lives in the decades since. There is no punchline here, and it would be wrong to reach for one. The takeaway is simpler and darker than any joke. It's probably fine is not a structural calculation, and when a confident shortcut gets signed off at a desk, the bill can come due for people who never even knew the decision was made. Some mistakes you laugh at. This one you just learn from. Number 11. Japan, 1999. And this is another one where the humor has to stay pointed firmly at the decision, because a man suffered enormously for it. The setting is a nuclear fuel processing plant in Tokaimura, where workers handled enriched uranium, the kind of material that demands to be treated with extreme, obsessive, almost paranoid precision. There is a very good reason nuclear fuel is normally processed using carefully engineered tanks, exact geometries, and rigid quantity limits. Gather too much of the wrong uranium too close together, and it can spontaneously kick off a nuclear chain reaction right there in the room with you. It's called a criticality accident, and it is every bit as bad as it sounds. So how was all this being handled at Tokaimura? To save a bit of time and money, the company had quietly encouraged workers to skip the safe, slow, engineered procedure and instead just, more or less, eyeball it. Rather than the proper system, the workers were mixing uranium by hand in stainless steel buckets, pouring it in like they were following grandma's recipe for cake batter. And on this day, they kept adding bucket after bucket into a tank that was never, ever designed to hold that much, bypassing the very safeguards built specifically to make a criticality physically impossible. When they poured in the 7th bucket, the uranium reached critical mass, and the room lit up with an invisible burst of radiation as an uncontrolled chain reaction flickered horribly to life. One of the workers, standing right over the tank, absorbed a dose of radiation so far beyond anything survivable that the story of the months which followed became one of the most sobering in the entire history of medicine. The reaction itself sputtered on and off for around 20 hours before it was finally stopped for good. This was not one reckless daredevil chasing a cheap thrill. It was a corporate shortcut, blessed from above and treated as perfectly normal, right up until physics reminded everyone why the rules existed in the first place. And that is the chillingly dull lesson at the center of it. The buckets were faster, the buckets were cheaper, and the buckets were never, ever safe. Good enough and nuclear are two phrases that should never share a sentence. Number 12 rewinds to Germany, 1921, and to a factory that had grown very, very comfortable with something it never should have trusted for a second. At the BASF plant in Opau sat a gigantic silo holding around 4,500 tons of fertilizer, a mixture of ammonium sulfate and ammonium nitrate. Now, ammonium nitrate has a well-known second career. It is also a powerful explosive. But in storage, this particular fertilizer had an annoying habit of clumping together into one rock-hard solid mass, and the workers needed it loose and grainy again in order to ship it out. So how do you break up thousands of tons of caked-together explosive fertilizer? At Opau, the answer they had settled on was, and I want to be completely clear that I am not making this up, small charges of dynamite. They would set off little controlled explosions right inside the pile to shake it back loose. Blasting apart a mountain of explosive material using more explosives sounds like the setup to a very short story. Except here's the truly wild part. They had done it before. Not a handful of times. More than 20,000 times. 20,000 blasts inside a silo of explosive fertilizer, and it had worked every single time, which is exactly the kind of flawless track record that turns insanely dangerous into just another Tuesday. The only reason it kept working was a lucky fluke of chemistry. The specific mixture they used happened to be very hard to detonate. But earlier that same year, the plant had quietly changed its production process, subtly altering the fertilizer's physical properties. Same routine, same easy confidence, freshly loaded gun. On September 21st, 1921, They lit a blast, just like the 20,000 before it, and this time, the entire silo went. The explosion carried the force of roughly 500 tons of TNT, tore a crater the size of a small lake, and flattened most of the plant along with much of the surrounding town, killing around 560 people. The real horror here isn't a single fool. It's how a genuinely insane act became invisible through sheer repetition. It's always been fine is not a safety system. It is just luck that hasn't run out yet. Number 13. And for our grand finale, the single most improbable disaster on this entire list. The day the city of Boston was attacked by desert. January 1919, the crowded north end of Boston. Towering over the neighborhood stood a giant steel tank owned by a commercial alcohol company, holding 2.5 million gallons of molasses, the thick, heavy, sweet syrup used to make industrial alcohol. Here's the problem. The tank was complete garbage. It had been thrown up fast and cheap, never properly tested, and from the very first day, it leaked so badly that local kids used to wander over and scrape free molasses off the sides for a snack. The tank literally groaned out loud. It dripped constantly. Every warning sign a giant metal vessel could possibly give that it was about to fail catastrophically. This one was giving in writing daily for years. And the company's brilliant engineering response to a tank that visibly, audibly leaked? They painted it brown. Not reinforced it, not drained it, not replaced it. They painted it so the leaking syrup would blend right in and stop alarming the neighbors. On January 15th, the hopelessly overstuffed tank finally gave up and burst, unleashing a wave of molasses over 15 feet tall and moving at an estimated 35 miles an hour. Yes, people were genuinely outrun and overtaken by syrup, which sounds hilarious right up until you remember that a 2-story wall of molasses hits with the crushing weight of a collapsing building. It tore buildings clean off their foundations and killed 21 people, and out of basic respect for them, that is exactly where the laughing stops. The disaster dragged on in the strangest possible way. Cleanup crews scrubbed for weeks. The harbor ran brown for months, and locals swore that on hot summer days, for decades afterward, the whole North End still smelled faintly of molasses. The lesson from the sweetest catastrophe in history is the same bitter one as all the others. When something is clearly, visibly, daily telling you it is about to fail, the solution is never a fresh coat of paint.